Welcome everyone to this session all about autism and support at school. We are a couple of us from Enquire and a couple of us from Scottish Autism, and we're really glad that you could all join us today. So for those new people just coming in, if you could make sure that your videos are off and that your microphones are off as well, just so that we don't get any interruptions as we're speaking. There is a chat function, so if you'd like to ask questions in the chat, you are welcome to do so. We don't have time to do a Q&A session today, but we do have a couple of prepared questions, and hopefully the presentation will answer a lot of the questions that you would be asking anyway. Certainly at Enquire, we speak to loads of families all the time on our helpline and through our other work. So we know the sorts of questions that you're likely to have, and hopefully we're going to be able to answer those. So first things first, I suppose we should do some introductions. So my name is Beth. I am an Advice and Information Officer at Enquire. I've been at Enquire for a few years now. And one of the things that I do at Enquire is outreach like this. I also do some of our children and young people work. I'm joined by Sharon, who's one of my colleagues. Do you want to introduce yourself, Sharon?
Evening, everybody. Yeah, I've been at Enquire since August 2021 as an Advice and Information Officer. For myself, I'm a single parent of a son who has autism and complex medical needs, and who's also faced challenges throughout his education. But I predominantly work on the helpline, so it's most often probably myself that you will speak to, or also from answering emails.
Fab. And the two of us from Enquire are very, very pleased and privileged to be joined by Deborah and Craig from Scottish Autism. So Deborah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Deborah Henderson, and I'm the Deputy Head Teacher at New Struan School, which is part of Scottish Autism. I've been there since about 2017, and it's a very privileged position that I'm in as part of that school. So lovely to be with you tonight.
Thanks, Deborah. And we're also joined by Craig. Craig, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm Craig. I'm one of the teachers at New Struan School. I've been there for just coming up for 4 years now. So I'm a primary school trained teacher, worked in the mainstream background, and then 4 years ago moved across to work with Scottish Autism at New Struan. And it's been an amazing experience, a big learning curve for me as well, but it's a wonderful place to be.
Thanks very much. We're going to hear more from Deborah and Craig later. But to start with, I thought we'd talk a little bit about Enquire and who we are. So Enquire is, Enquire. We are the Scottish Advice Service for Additional Support for Learning. Our role is really to help parents and carers, families and children and young people and professionals to understand what additional support for learning is, what the laws and guidance say, and really to share advice and information about children's rights to support at school. And as this slide says, our vision is that all children in Scotland are supported, included and listened to throughout their education. We've kind of touched upon a couple of these things already, but the ways that we do that at Enquire are very broad. We've got loads of different things on offer for you. So we obviously run outreach sessions like tonight, but we also have a couple of websites full of information. Enquire.org.uk is our website for parents and carers and for professionals. Loads and loads of information and advice on hopefully everything you would ever need to know about additional support for learning, organised in ways that hopefully you can find that information by different themes and things like that. And then reach.scot is our website for children and young people. It's actually a lot of the same advice, but it's just framed in a way for children and young people to access and to engage with. As Sharon mentioned, we also have a helpline, so you can give us a call if you want to have a conversation sort of one-on-one with one of our advisor teams. Obviously really helpful if you've got a sort of specific situation or a particular question that you can't find an answer to and you'd like to talk that through with somebody. We are certainly there to do that. You can call us, you can also send us an inquiry through a written web form, and we've got web chat as well, and we've got an email address. And then if you'd like to keep up with what we're doing, we're on social media, everywhere you would probably think to find us. It's Enquire. Oh, that's the wrong, that's our old address. It's at Enquire Reach ASL on everything. And we've also got a newsletter that if you'd like to sign up to, we send it out every couple of weeks. And it's information on updates on the laws and guidance, new things that Enquire are doing, our upcoming events, all that kind of stuff. I should say as well that if you see messages from Jen in the chat, she is our comm support for today. She's going to be posting in some of the links to the website and things like that as we go through. So Jen, welcome Jen, and thanks for joining us in the background there. Deborah, would you like to sort of say a bit more about Scottish Autism and who you guys are?
Yeah, sure. So we are obviously a Scottish charity, which New Student School is part of. We're the only school part of the organisation. Predominantly Scottish Autism support autistic people through a range of different services out in the community. And yeah, we are lucky to be part of that in terms of children and young people services. We also have our residencies, which is part of our school. So some people, some of our young people stay with us, not on campus, but within our residential flats, and attend school with us each day. And the rest of our population come just as you would to school on a day-to-day basis. But we do have our autism advice line, which you can see there, and although it is always very busy, the advisors are fantastic at coming back to you. They will do that, and if there's anything that they feel could be directed towards the school in terms of specific to young people or education, they'll often do that. So we have a role to play within that as well.
Oh, thanks very much.
Deborah, thanks very much. And I think today, for what we were talking about, is for the aims of today. So I know tonight there'll probably be a real mix of families here. Some of your maybe children in early years, primary, secondary, or even going through the transition of leaving school. And you also may have more than one child with different types of additional support needs. So our plan this evening is to be able to help you build on that understanding of additional support needs. Things like what the laws and guidance say, the types of supports that may help, how you can work with the school, and we'll hopefully be able to, as Beth mentioned earlier, answer some of the commonly asked questions that we get about support. So I hope that sounds good so far, and I'm going to hand you back to Beth. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Sharon. So before we get started, what I'd like to do is ask everybody a question. We're going to ask you this now, and we're also going to ask you this at the end. So Jen, I think, can you get the poll to launch? I'm not sure if I can get it to work from here. So what we want to know is how confident you feel in your understanding of your child's rights to support at school. But Janet's saying I'm logged in from another device, so my polling session is inactive, which is strange because I could see it earlier, so I'm not sure what that means. Okay, right. Well,
sorry, Beth, I'm not sure how to get it to launch. It doesn't seem to be letting me do that, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, we'll skip the official poll, but just have a think right now. How confident do you feel in your understanding of your child's rights? And at the end, hopefully, you'll feel differently. Hopefully, you'll feel more confident in your understanding.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, I've just found it. If you want to do it, or do you want to?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, sorry. Is it the start of webinar questions?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, that should be with everyone now.
Cool. So you should have a pop-up in front of you. It's totally anonymous. We won't know who picked what question, but we'd just like to know where are you starting at? How confident do you feel at the moment in understanding your child's rights to support at school? So give you a couple of minutes to answer that, and then we'll move on. You should have 4 options there. It should be very confident, confident, not very confident, and not at all confident.
I think that looks like most people have answered it there.
Cool.
Yeah, so I just Do you want me to share results? Is that?
Yeah, why not? Let's see, let everyone see how everyone's looking. So this is how we're all feeling at the moment, and we'll ask you all that question again at the end, and hopefully we'll all moved up a rung or two and feeling more confident about understanding your children's rights.
Okey-doke.
So as Beth was mentioning there, obviously about children's rights, so when we're talking about children's rights, we're mostly going to be focusing on children's rights around support in school, but it's important to obviously acknowledge that the children have a whole host of rights, what they're protected by a number of different pieces of legislation. This includes the right to an education, have their views be heard, and the rights to understand obviously the newly incorporated UNCRC. But just now we're going to focus on additional support for learning laws, which for here it only applies to children who are attending local authority nurseries or schools, or who have been placed in different schools that are funded by the local authority. If your children and young people go to an independent school or are home educated, then the ESL legislation doesn't apply. However, we've got specific fact sheets about independent schools and home education, which I would encourage you to go and check them out. But you can also find hopefully get lots of information that can still be helpful as partly of coming together later on about working with the schools that hopefully we can help you with as well. We're also talking about the rights as well to do with parents and carers. It's really important to acknowledge that you have your own rights. In the context that we're talking about today is, in particular, you've got your rights to share your views about your child's education, about their support, and have your views taken into account. The whole part of that is about you are part of that planning process. You also, if you're going into meetings, you have the right to have a supporter or an advocate at the meetings. It could be friends, family members, or as I say, a professional advocate. And I think as well, to make sure, and some of you may already know, but you do have the right to ask for your child to be assessed, in particular for a specific concern that you have, or things about if you want them to be assessed for a coordinated support plan, which is a specific type of learning protected by the law. And you also do have that right to ask a local authority to place your child in a different school. And this is what we call as making a placing request. I think one of the big things as well is what's really important is under the Parental Involvement Act, it recognises the vital role that parents and carers play in their child's learning and the development. And the aims for that as well is to encourage parents to develop their learning at home and within the communities. And then with that in the Act is reflecting and sharing those roles and responsibilities with the schools and working together, because a lot of the things that we hope is that when you're developing within school, they're developing at home, and that can all mirror together.
Definitely, thanks, Sharon. So when we're talking today, we're mostly focused on additional support for learning and additional support for learning legislation. So very first point to start with really is what those rights mean. So if your child needs support for whatever reason, then they are entitled to support. So if they can't benefit from school education without extra help for any reason, they are entitled to support. The definition, like for whatever reason, is really broad, and we wanted to put up some examples here just to give you a sense of what that might mean. This list is by no means exhaustive, but it's just an idea to think about. I think a lot of people associate support at school or additional support needs with diagnosed conditions or with particular things like autism. And of course, those things definitely do fall under additional support for learning, but it's important to remember that first of all, you don't need a diagnosis to be entitled to support. But also those support needs can be really, really broad, and they're often interconnected. So obviously today we're going to be focusing a little bit on autism, and we know that autism affects children at school in lots of different ways. But if anything else is going on at home, if that autism is impacting on other things, like for example, friendships or bullying, or maybe it's the sensory needs that come alongside with autism, all of those things fall under additional support needs, which means that your child has a right to get support with those things.
We mentioned earlier that you hear a lot about things to do with the schools, but actually the local authorities' duties is vital to know as well, is because they additional support for learning actually falls under the local authority, the education department at your local council. And in practice, it's often the schools who will do a lot of the planning, provide all the support for the children on behalf of the local authority. But they, as in the local authority, have that duty to provide an adequate and efficient provision for support. This includes identifying obviously the children's needs, planning their support, and keeping that support under review. And when they're saying about, identifying needs, that can obviously be a range of things, including, the child's school, doing observations and the areas that they may need support in within school. And it should also include listening to your views and your children's views. And this could be done in an informal way. It could be maybe just a chat at the classroom door, or it could be more informal, like a proper child planning meeting. And if there is a lot of things to discuss with the school and you've got particular concerns, sometimes identifying those needs do require a more formal assessment or to seek a diagnosis. And we have a fact sheet on identifying needs that has a lot of more information that you can absolutely have a look at. And I think as well, when it's coming to planning this support, it's really important to know that planning is an ongoing process. It's not a one-stop shop, because children's support will change as their needs change. It could be they need more or they don't need as much, but all children should have some kinds of personal learning planning. And for children with additional support needs, it might be that planning is needed to be more in place to be able to get that right support. And it's important about recording this to make sure that it's covering all the different areas. But we would always and often recommend that for parents and carers to talk to the school about what kind of written plans they have, because a lot of them use different names of local authorities. And again, it's more about, what's appropriate, what needs to be recorded, and most importantly, what your child's needs are. Again, as I've mentioned about the fact sheet for identifying needs, we have more information on our planning section on our website. We mentioned when we're talking about support, obviously additional support needs can mean many, many different things. And we've got a few examples obviously shown here about what support looks like, but by no means is this an exhaustive list, because we know there can be multiple reasons. And we've said it before, support must be based on a child's individual needs, and that the planning should include the families and the children themselves as much as they can be involved. And as we've already mentioned, needs do change. Support can change too. Sometimes children need more or extra support in different subjects, different areas, or at different times of their lives. For example, when they're changing schools, or support can be viewed as a key part of their planning process. I think from here as well, you will see that some kinds of the support at school can be potentially put in place pretty quickly and without needing lots of extra resources, while others clearly would probably need a lot more involvement, possibly needing other specialists and maybe some assessments being requested. But I think what is really important is sometimes it's this, and we will know this and you will know this, the smallest of changes can really make such a big difference. So start by asking the school to what they think might help. A good place of it sometimes to start is if you're thinking collectively, they talk about the team around the child meetings. That's really what it is.
I think he needs to be in a school with a space. I don't think he needs to be in just our school.
Sorry, somebody's speaking.
Yeah,
Could you make sure that you mute yourself, please?
Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. So they will obviously, the teachers and the professionals that are supporting your children, they have their own expertise and knowledge about what they think will work for the children in class. So you come along with your expertise of your child as well. And that's when hopefully you can share things together, see what can be worked. And we mentioned earlier on about your learning at home. Sometimes, and the hope is that the work that you've done, and if it's worked well and you feel that could be implemented, then it could maybe be mirrored at home and vice versa. So there's some continuity, and that will help, because we obviously know lots of children with autism like routine, they like the purpose of that. So, and that can sometimes help, as we said earlier, to move things along a little bit quicker and maybe improve things on a shorter time scale, whilst other things obviously we might need to wait for other inputs from other services. So as we've got Deborah and Craig here, so I'm going to pass you over now, and they're going to talk more specifically about how autistic children can be supported in school.
Oh, you're muted, Deborah.
Rookie mistake there. Thank you. Thanks. I'm going to start us off tonight, and Craig's going to do the next couple of slides. I thought it would be useful to just start by outlining how autism can impact learning, and then go on to explain examples of the supports and considerations at school that could be helpful in the next slides that follow. I do think that staff understanding these what we would kind of term as cognitive theories can help in terms of understanding the difficulties and the strengths that we see presented. If we understand the why, then our approach is more likely to be successful, and because it's informed. I think what I would like to also just note is that there will be many other factors impacting what we would coin as a kind of a pupil profile. And that is regardless of what a young person might be dealing with. So I think it's just important to remember that will impact learning and engagement, such as trauma or sensory processing, a learning difficulty, for example. So theory of mind is the ability to understand the mental states of each other. This helps us kind of make sense and predict the behaviour of other people, and also understand our own and other emotions. It's thought that this is underdeveloped in autistic people by about 4 to 5 years. And what that sometimes then shows itself as is that they can appear rude, and they assume that you know what they know, and there can be then difficulties between fantasy and reality. I'm really just skimming the surface of these just to kind of give you a bit of context for where I would then explain some of the examples of support. Central coherence was really the kind of first theory that really attempted to explain the skills and the strengths that we see that go with autism. But it does impact the ability to then pull together information into context and get that kind of rounded meaning and gist of things. So, for example, some of our learners will become very fixated on detail and parts, leaning more on the kind of rote learning rather than maybe understanding the fuller picture. And executive functioning, that it is associated with the frontal lobes of the brain, and has impact on controlling impulses, planning, your working memory. So this is also impacted in people with ADHD as well. So all the learning and teaching approaches that we need to consider should really be built on a model of understanding a child and young person's autism, and how that shows up for them, as well as their developmental stage, and as well as any barriers to learning, such as health or adverse childhood experiences, for example. Sometimes we find that it's quite helpful to ask for a cognitive or a functional assessment, because and that's usually carried out by like a education psychologist. Sometimes CAMS can be asked to carry that out, but that information can be a useful kind of point in time for explaining often the spiky profile that we see with our young people, and the strengths that they have, but also the areas that we need to support, and actually having an assessment and seeing that. I found certainly in my own teaching practice and working with colleagues, that can be one of the most helpful things to start from. So you can ask for that. Creating a kind of structured environment, that won't really be news to you, but it's fundamental to being able to develop the independence of our young people, and also reduce their stress levels. We kind of talk about that environment, along with the use of visuals, which we'll come on to, is really kind of bread and butter. We need to have that right, and then we can build on other things after that. The content of the curriculum, we need to encourage that to be through meaningful contexts, and I do think as a general, we are much better at doing that in education as a whole now. We really understand why that's much more helpful to all young people in terms of being able to transfer skills and make the links, particularly for our guys. So it's about finding things that they are highly motivated and engaged in, and I'm really focusing on that. If school are struggling to engage and develop that rapport, then taking that skills and strengths-based approach can be really a very effective way of supporting learning, and providing opportunities for personal achievement as well. We want to really bolster the self-esteem of our young people, because we acknowledge that can often be very fragile. And it really allows us to kind of highlight the value and where their skill set lies. And often what we find is, if we're doing that and we're getting that right, the other bits come along anyway. So it's not always about, sometimes we look at filling the gaps, and that can take us down a very difficult path. So I would always start with where the young person's at. Play, I've kind of noted these. I'm just going through these briefly, because I've hopefully given a little bit of detail here anyway for you to go away and have a think about. But play is something that we focus very, very well on in our own school, and I think how autistic young people play may look different, but play is still play, and the value of play in terms of self-regulation, gross and fine motor skills, problem solving, creative thinking, it's still the same. So it doesn't matter if it doesn't look the same, and whilst they should have the same opportunities and entitlements to play, and that's what we really advocate for as their peers, they shouldn't be encouraged to play the same. They will still be getting a benefit from that. Yeah, I think if we're allowing space for our young people to do that, that can be really valuable. And I've just put a couple of other bullet points on that one about being very explicit. Don't assume that context. Being very clear of the start and end points of a task. It might not be enough just to say that it's time for maths or it's time for PE, or but to break that down further and chunk that so the young person really understands what they've to do within that, how long that activity is going to take, what's expected of them and when it will be finished. So being as clear as possible I think what we're trying to do is provide predictability to the young person, and also just lower those some of those stress levels that can be very high for our young people. And we'll go on to talk about that in the next few slides. But for now, I'll pass over to Craig, who's going to do the next couple of slides for you.
Thank you. Yeah, so obviously we are very fortunate, I would say, in the school that we operate in, with the environment that we have. But getting the environment right for our young people is essential. I don't really like to bring it up because it's been now 4 years, but since COVID. But after we came back as a school from COVID and from time away from school and coming back together again, one of the big focuses that we talked about was about making sure our young people were feeling safe and were feeling happy, and getting an environment right for them was essential for that. And that message has stayed with me over those 4 years and continues today. So anytime we bring in new young people into our school, into our setting, it's very much at the forefront of my mind. If we can get that right for them, if they can feel safe and feel happy in the space that they're in, with the people around them, with the staff that they're working with, then it opens up all these other opportunities. Just like Deborah was saying there about feeding into playing to the young people's strengths, really focusing on them and building up that sense of achievement and those opportunities for their young people, focused on those strengths. If we do all these things, everything all joins together. It's that kind of big jigsaw and bringing it all together for us. So in school environments typically can be very challenging for our young people. When we think about the size of a school building, we think about the noise, the other people there. There's a lot of transitions as well throughout the day, maybe working with multiple people as well within a day. So all of these various components can then make the environment very challenging and difficult for our young people. When we think about how an autistic person may prefer to work, prefer to learn, that we think about these flow states. So we think about activities that they become really invested in, have a real interest in, that they find really rewarding as well and can be fully immersed in. And there's loads of great opportunities for learning that can come from that. But again, within the environment, if there's lots of changes and lots of transitions through that day, then it can become very difficult for those opportunities to be there for that person, to be able to work through those things and to get that sense of achievement and to really get invested in those activities. And then also really thinking about within the environment, what is it that the young person needs? And there's some examples there about personalised space, about opportunities for chewing, for stimming, these kind of things also to be really taken into consideration about what can be provided to them to allow them to feel safe and comfortable and happy within the environment that they're in, so that they're then going to be able to achieve what we were hoping for them to be achieving. There we are, thank you. Also really considering about the sensory input within a young person. So within our school, all of our young people have a sensory profile that we build up over a period of time. All the members of staff who work with them, with our young people, all contribute to putting that together. So we're really thinking about the various factors that play there in terms of what that young person needs sensory-wise, but also what sensory input is too much for them, what can be quite overstimulating for them, and what might that look like as well. So we really consider things like the lights, like touch, what that might feel like for them, sounds as well. And again, if we're thinking about school environments and lots of other young people there, or things like that bell going off every 50 minutes for a change of period, all of these can really have an impact. All these sensory inputs can have an impact on the young person. Also, the time it can take for that young person to process those things too. So it may be that while at school, it can look one way, while at home, it can then look quite different as well, or between different settings and different places, even within the school, that can look quite different as well. So really kind of thinking about all of those factors, internally and externally, and what impact that has on the young person. I love the part there about validation of how autistic people experience their world is key. I think for all of us to kind of understand how they view things, how that young person is viewing things, is so important. And that saying about if you've met one person with autism, then you've met one person with autism. And it's really about getting to know that young person and getting to know our young people, I think is something that we do very well within our school. As I say, we're very fortunate within the environment that we work in. It's a lot smaller, and we really get the opportunities to get that time to get to know our young people, to be able to try our very best to get it right for them. But I think if you can get to know the young person, if you know what they're getting and where you're able to bring that in from them as well, that understanding has such a massive impact on them. Like I said before, about time to process that sensory, having really opportunities to kind of think about that and what does that look like in their journey. And also other things, so same again about reducing the sensory input, thinking about what they need, other things as well. So quite often we maybe look at things sort of retrospectively after things have happened, but what could we do that's maybe proactive? So for example, a young person who's maybe biting, so giving something to chew on, something like that, maybe helping support them. But is there a reason why they're doing that thing? Or is there a reason for certain behaviors that we're seeing? Is there something that we could do in advance that's maybe going to help that young person to feel more safe, to feel more supported, to feel more regulated, that's then maybe not going to lead to something else? Is there other things at play that we could then look further into and delve into a bit further?
Back to me. Okay, so I mean, it's likely that you've probably seen examples of these visual supports. I think what I would say is that it's important to that the type of visual supports that we are using with our young people are appropriate to the level of communication of the young person, and this is where the likes of a speech and language therapist can be very helpful to guide that. There's no point in using a visual that is far too abstract for the level of communication ability of the young person. I've tried to sketch that out on the slide to show you the kind of hierarchy. So just to take you through that, OR is a kind of stands for objects of reference. So that's your most concrete. That's like, you know, your jacket's on and that's telling you that we're going, or the keys to the car, that kind of thing. And we all use them throughout. What we really advocate for is that total communication approach. So we might be using visual supports along with signing, for example, if that's appropriate for the young person, as well as using our verbal language. And depending on where the young person is at a moment in time, there'll be some supports that are more pertinent to that moment. For example, if a young person's feeling overwhelmed, we would want to reduce the verbal that we're using and make more use of the visual supports, but it should be part of the kind of totality of offering. Photographs, then, they're again very concrete, they represent the real thing. Then moving on to symbols, we would usually do coloured symbols before you do black and white symbols, and then kind of then on to the written word. The written word is still a visual, you know. I like to try and make that as clear as possible with the example of your shopping list, for example. We all take that list to the shops. It's still a visual support. So if that is an appropriate level for that young person, it may go alongside a symbol. But some of our young people, especially our older young people, will often talk about not wanting to seem different, or it feels baby having those visuals, those kind of symbols, which is absolutely fine, and we have to respect that. But they can have a written timetable or a written list of what they've to do to kind of support their understanding and their organisational skills. So yeah, just to be aware that it's an appropriate match. But good old post-its, whiteboards are always at hand. Stick drawings I've found myself doing. You don't need to have, it doesn't need to be perfect as long as it's understood by the young person, and we tend to have all of these things to hand. Next slide, please. So, okay, sometimes it's about then trying to explain to people why that's important, especially in an education setting. Tempo Grandin, you may have heard about Tempo Grandin. She is an autistic speaker. She'll speak very openly about her own experiences, and she's been highly influential in making sure that the kind of autistic world is understood and has been opened up. So visual thinking is a strength for autistic people, and that's why we need to use that. But it can also then be the first to become overwhelmed. And that kind of visual auditory. So we've got to be very careful of what we're using, and how often we're using it, what else is around them. So we talk about the likes of our environment, really only having the kind of information presented on walls that needs to be presented on walls. So that then the channels are opened up for receiving the visual or the verbal support that is presented and is more accessible. I think the visual is helpful because even if you think about just now, once the words are out, they're gone. You know, they're floating around somewhere, but the visual is a permanent, it's a concrete, it can be referred to, you can go back to that. So that can be very, very helpful. And sometimes it can look like young people aren't using the visuals. So you'll get sometimes staff saying, oh, they don't need them or they don't use them. I would always suggest that they absolutely are. You're just not necessarily tuning into that side glance or that look on the wall. They are using them all the time. And what we tend to find is if we take them away, might be okay for a wee while, and then cracks start to show. So you have to work with the young person, because obviously there'll be things that they are able to say that they want or they don't want, and to work with them to see how helpful that can be. But I've just tried to list some of the reasons there about why they are important for that kind of the autistic mind, and how supportive they can be. I would be very careful with prompts, those kind of prompts that create dependency. So moving away from people to the environment is more transferable. So those visuals can do that. People, you can't necessarily do that. The visuals can always be there, but Craig might not always be there, but the visuals are. So that's where then you're supporting that independence and the transferring of the skills. Thank you. This is a huge one, and it's one that I really thought I really wanted to try and get in here tonight. I've put links on the following slide that you'll have access to kind of follow up on some of these bits that I'm going to mention. Many of our pupils have significant difficulties identifying and regulating their emotions, and much of this is impacted obviously by their autism, and therefore then their lack of identity of self as well. Autistic young people are more susceptible to the likes of trauma and anxiety due to the autism features, such as like cognitive rigidity, communication difficulty, sensory reactivity, that kind of thing. So it's really important to remember that there needs to be a strong focus on understanding what causes our pupils to experience stress and deregulation. Just as Craig touched upon with the example of the chew, okay, we might need that to help us regulate, but what is behind some of that? And that's about digging deeper rather than just a little bit of that sticky plaster approach and maintaining the now, going deeper than that, because it does have a universal impact on our young people's ability to experience a successful education placement. We would do a kind of stress reduction and wellbeing plan for our young people when they come into us, and obviously that takes a long time to really understand the needs of that young person, but it will include things like their sensory needs, environmental considerations that's very important to that young person, communication support, what relaxation looks like, physical activity and how that can support stress, what their zones of learning look like, because that is different for every young person as well. So being able to kind of draw that information together to say that when these things are happening in this way, the stress is much lower and the young person is more able to take from the educational experience. And again, that will change. So that is a kind of document that needs to be constantly reviewed. And there can be lots of people that input into that as well, such as CAMS or OT, speech and language therapy. But I think it would be a useful thing, a holistic plan to have there. And where possible, if our young people can participate and have an input into that. We want all of our young people to feel safe and secure in their environment. That's the premise of this. So we work with our young people to develop relational responsibility and emotional regulation over time. So even though we know that it's impacted and it's difficult for our young people, we still have to support them to understand what they can do and develop that toolkit of coping strategies that are meaningful to them and that help them share the school environment. So there's a bit that we need to do on making sure that we're supporting stress and well-being, and then there's, once we're getting that right, and there's bits in place for that, it's then also how we work with the young person to understand what they can do within that as well. And I mean, just looking at our population, for example, they're all on a different journey with that, and yet everything that we do has to be, you know, has to recognise that. The PACE model you might have heard about through Daniel Hughes. PACE stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy, and they're the kind of 4 cornerstones to what we would call relational practice. Environment and relationships are your biggies. If we are getting them right, our young people are in good hands and have a much better chance at having a successful school experience. So it's about developing the understanding of what's going on for the young person underneath all of that. And as I said, I've not got time to kind of go into that tonight, but I've put a link on the next slide for you. It takes a lot of practice. There's some people that just, you know, are tuned into that and kind of get that very innately, and then but through practicing that and reading about it, it does come, and it makes the battles, it makes what we are trying to understand that's going on for that young person a lot easier. So yeah, I think just to kind of tie up some of that, we know that emotional understanding is impacted in autistic young people, and that's regardless of their IQ. And what I've found is teaching emotional vocabulary and linking that to how it feels in the body is really important, and there's a lot of work going on in schools across the board doing that on a much deeper level than what had been done before. But our autistic young people, they may label something, for example, as stress and anxiety. Actually, it's excitement, but it feels the same in the body. So they can't differentiate that. And that's where some of that explicit teaching is needed, using examples that the young person is familiar with. So if they really love going on roller coasters, for example, you're bringing that in, but you're starting with the young person and not just taking, you know, generic scenarios or generic pictures of people on the internet that they've never met before, or symbols of people looking very happy. We don't look like that when we're happy. So it's about, you know, kind of really teaching that, and that's, it could be lifelong, but chipping away at that and explaining that. And usually it can be helpful to do that quite soon after an experience, good or bad. Well, there's some of that residual emotion still going on, but the young person's more regulated and feels there's a trust there for us. What was going on there? Be curious, going back to that playfulness, that pace model. What was going on for us there? What I was seeing in you was this. Were you getting a sense of that? How did that feel in your body, and body mapping it? Things like that. Yeah, so sorry, I was just saying that one of the most helpful kind of anecdotes or examples of how we need to understand how autistic people understand emotions and then verbalize that to us is that they are often more associative than contextualized. So this example that I had heard has always stuck with me about a young person not liking baked potatoes. And they had a bit of a phobia of baked potatoes. So whenever he was in a situation where he felt that and he felt frightened, he would scream, "I hate baked potatoes," even though there was no baked potatoes around. But he associated how he felt with the potatoes. So I think that if anything, that's a good example, and take it away and share it with staff in schools when we're talking about how we help our young people understand what's going on in their body and labeling that accurately. So I hope that, again, I'm conscious that these are huge kind of meaty subjects, but hopefully giving you kind of threads or nuggets that you can go away and explore a bit more. And then the last slide from Craig and I were just really some useful links, as I'd said, for you to kind of follow up on. Call Scotland are a charity who support speech and language therapy, but really focusing on kind of assistive technology that can be very helpful for our young people and for staff to kind of get some training, and they also have a kind of lending library as well, so they would be a useful kind of resource to tap into if we were looking for support and communication. Studio 3, I don't feel like I'm going to do them justice explaining really who they are, but we work very closely with Studio 3, who are a team of exceptional people looking at supporting behaviour and kind of crisis management, and their website is full of free webinars for parents and for education practitioners, but they also have opportunities that you can sign up to as well. So for both parents and schools, that it would be a really good resource. Zones of regulation, again, you may have heard of them, but that kind of approach looks at supporting emotional regulation. And then obviously you've got a PACE model, which I touched upon earlier. So I hope that's been helpful.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Deborah, and to Craig as well. Hopefully loads of information to take away there and to think more about. And we will be sharing the slides from today, so don't worry about writing down these links or anything. We'll send them all out to everybody, so you'll get them that way. I think one of the things that we definitely wanted to talk about, and that I know a few people have asked questions about throughout the session today, is about what to do if things aren't going right. So obviously we've got loads of examples there from Deborah and from Craig about things that might help, things to think about, things to talk to the school about. But there are lots of steps that you can take if things aren't in place at the moment, or if things aren't going as you would like them to be. So the first thing that we always recommend, if you haven't done it already, or even if you have and it hasn't worked the first time, is to ask for a meeting. You know, schools are very busy places, and sometimes that conversation at the school gates gets forgotten among 100 other things. So asking for a sort of more formalized, can we sit down and talk about my child and their needs? I'm really concerned about XYZ, you know, I'm really concerned about how they're coping with the sensory environment. I'd really like to talk about getting them a written support plan, sitting down and having that conversation, either with your child's class teacher or with the person at school that's responsible for additional support for learning, would always be the first step. After that, you can escalate and ask to speak directly to the head teacher. And following that, there's more things that you can do too. So there's a couple of things on there. First of all, putting things into writing, getting things written down, and whether that's in the form of a written plan or just in an email thread about, you know, making sure that your concerns are clear and documented, means that if you then do need to escalate your concerns any further, there's ways that you can do that. As we touched upon earlier, it's actually your local authority that are responsible for planning and providing your child's support. So if you are not sure, you've tried with the school, things aren't working as you'd like them to be, and the first thing that we'd always recommend to do after you've spoken with the school, after you've spoken with the head, is to get in touch directly with your local authority. We have a page on our website with all the local authority contacts that we have, and that can be a way to kind of escalate. There's more steps you can take beyond that. There's things like making a formal complaint. There's also mediation. There's independent adjudication. There are plenty of options available to you. Seeking advocacy that we mentioned before can sometimes be helpful if you feel like your views aren't getting heard, or your child's views aren't getting heard. We've got a whole page on our website all about it. And as Jen's mentioned a couple of times, if you've got a specific situation, if you've tried a few steps and you want to talk about what you could do next, that's where we can come in and we can talk to you about that. On our helpline, we can think about the things that you've tried and maybe what else might help in the future. I realise that we are now at the 9 o'clock time. So before we go any further, I'm going to just put that poll in the chat again to see where we are, just so that we get a sense of where we're up to. And then, of course, if you need to head off quickly, you can do. If you've got the time to stay, we do have those pre-prepared questions that we mentioned earlier. So if you are available to stay for another 10 or 15 minutes, you're certainly welcome to. But first of all, Jen, could you share that the end of the session poll to everybody, please?
There we are. That should be with you now.
So if you could all have another vote, again, it's completely anonymous, but how do you feel now? Are you feeling more confident than you were earlier? Hopefully that is the case. We'll give you a couple of minutes to put in your answers, and hopefully we'll see that there's been an improvement in everybody feeling a little bit more confident today. How are we doing, Jen? I can't see the poll, so.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I think that looks like we've got most people responded. So I'll give you another couple of seconds and then I will share the poll for you. All right, I think that seems to be everybody. So if I end and then share results.
How are we looking?
Yeah, so it looks like, yep, quite a big increase in the confident side, so 73% now confident, 5% very confident. We've still got a couple there that may benefit from either kind of taking a look at some of the pages that we've shared, or contacting contacting the team in other ways. But yeah, it looks like there was a good increase there.
Oh, fab, that's great to hear. So like I say, we are going to answer a couple of questions now, but I do realise that it's the 9 o'clock time. So you are welcome to stay on. If you need to go, this session is recorded, so you will get a copy of this, and it will include this extra bit with questions too. So totally up to you. But I'm going to jump straight into the first question. So
as we said earlier, I'll just say that we mentioned that we're going to do these questions. So a lot of the questions and some of the common questions that we do get is about my child is masking at school and is exhausted when they're getting home, and just how can I explain this to the school in a better way?
Yeah, definitely. So if I was speaking to you on the helpline, we could definitely talk about this in more detail, but masking, for anybody that's not aware, is the term used for when neurodivergent people or autistic people are sort of hiding and covering up and maybe repressing some of their natural reactions so that they are fitting into the environment. So it's maybe not clear to the people around them that they're finding a situation particularly stressful or particularly uncomfortable. It's obviously a very energy sapping thing to do. Some people do it naturally, some people are sort of choose to do it, or they decide that they want to do it in those situations, but it can have a big impact on how a child's feeling at school. I'm not autistic myself, and I think having to spend all that energy to pretend to be something or to look a certain way or for your facial expressions, it's a lot of energy that a neurotypical person isn't spending at school, and they can focus on other things. So if that's something that's happening at school, and I know we hear from families quite often where their child appears to be fine and school staff are saying, well, they seem all right at school, they don't seem upset, they're not having meltdowns in front of us, so what are we supposed to do? We know that that's a thing that happens often, and having that conversation about masking and talking to the school specifically about it, what it is and what it looks like, can be really valuable. Not all school staff will have a deep or sort of long-standing awareness of autism. Certainly terminology like masking is quite new to a lot of people. So certainly don't be afraid to go into a school, especially if it's maybe a mainstream school with less experience, to have that conversation. Do you know what masking is? What does it look like for your child? Can your child sort of explain how they're feeling? Talking to the school about the 24-hour life of your child. So how do they feel in the morning before school? What happens when you're in the car on the way there? When they're at school, how do they feel, in their lesson time versus at break time versus at lunchtime? When they get home, how do they feel? It's about that 24-hour life that your child is living, and how everybody can support them in the best way. Wellbeing and mental health certainly is something that falls under additional support for learning. So it is something that the school needs to be working on. The same way that if anything else was happening at home, you would expect the school to be supportive of that. If you were facing a bereavement, or if there was lots of stress going on at home, if you were unwell at home, or your parent was unwell and you were very stressed in the school, whatever is going on in your home environment, as much as that isn't directly school's responsibility, necessarily, the impact of those things happening at home on their time at school is something that you can talk about, and something that there can be support put in place for. Like we've mentioned, all those things about maybe having a quiet space, thinking about the sensory needs of the child. Do they have somewhere where they can feel safe to unmask? Do they have staff at school that they trust, that they can talk to about how they're feeling? And that long-term sense of how can they be encouraged and feel safe to not need to mask when they're at school. Deborah, Craig, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that from your perspective.
I think you've answered it very well, Beth. I think it just goes back to really understanding the experience of that young person, and validating that as much as possible, even if you don't understand it. But to really listen to what the young person's telling you, and maybe not, that can be telling you verbally or telling you through their behaviour and their presentation. Getting that, going back to that stress reduction plan, and sometimes it can be, the smallest adjustments that can make the biggest impact. But I think we have to validate how the young person's feeling, and that can be, most helpful at times.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks very much. So the next question, Sharon, I'm going to ask you this as if you're on the helpline. So my child's got a transition coming up. So perhaps they're moving from nursery to primary, or primary to secondary, or from secondary onwards. And they're worried about managing with that big change, with that transition. What can their school do to help them with that? What should they be doing?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I think it can be really, the run up to any child starting school or moving from a different school, or, can be a really exciting step for some. But for many autistic children and young people, they'll find that change very scary and overwhelming, and may find, it difficult to transfer certain skills into different situations. And they're also, which we'll be aware of, is there's many that have maybe complex sensory issues, become really anxious with unfamiliar noises, smells, lights. And I think the school environment is obviously in a whole is one of the big things. So it can be tough to know how to help. But I think the most important thing is about being the opportunity for you and your child to be given to share your views through that transition planning. And that transition planning clearly would start as 12 months prior to the normal practices, 12 months prior to them moving or changing school, and making sure that you ask the lead professional who's coordinating that the information that's been held and passed over, to make sure that it's absolutely shared with the new school. If there's any written plans that's already in place, any planning plans, make sure that all of the types of supports that they're getting now is shared with the new school. And I think then also a lot of, we hear a lot of for autistic pupils that they do sometimes have enhanced transitions, and that can sometimes make a really big difference to them. That means, obviously, it means extra visits to the school before that they've got a chance to meet like the staff, familiar with the environment. And I think it also allows them the opportunity to make sure that they get to know and how it's going to work for them already in advance, because I think that's what can be really scary to some of them, is that they just don't know what they're going into. And I think part of that planning is, again, it could be for some of the children to say, okay, well, how is this going to work better for them? Parents being able to say what might work for them, or the teachers are able to share what might work for them. So it's about, can they take photos of the place on the key people that they're going to be involved in their transition, creating a photo book so that can maybe help relieve any anxiety. You can talk about things about maybe a soft start coming into the school when they first start, for the first few days or weeks, just to try and alleviate that concern of and the expectation that's required. Deborah mentioned earlier on about, the visual supports. It's so important to reinforce them, and also verbal communication for them. And they can be, like for it particularly with change, if they find it really difficult, it can take them longer to process these things. As an example, if you're using visual supports, try and explain about things like the bus journey to school, making sure that you've used pictures, the whole process, including the school. And I think as well, it's about, talking about timetables, because even when they're changing, even from their nursery and play based, and they're moving just to P1, and then more particularly from primary to high school, there is obviously a big change, and it's about what's going to be in that environment, maps of the schools. That's where that enhanced transition will be so important, to allow them to understand. And I think part of it as well is like it's encouraging them even to do like a countdown of the schools that they're going, so they're understanding it a bit more. Some of the children might benefit from having social stories to let them know what to expect in their new school. And I think as well as one of the things that I always find that's quite helpful to explain to parents is trying to make sure that the teachers are preparing in their current setting of where they are for that change, and they're talking about it a lot. It's not just when they're going to visit their new environment, and that can be quite good. And I think, we've obviously touched on that anxiety can be such a big thing for them regarding the change, and making sure that they've got lots of opportunities to ask questions about their concerns. That's both the children and parents, if the children can express that, to see if it will benefit for them. I think as well as setting aside times for relaxation techniques, if they can, if that's part of their planning things, or if you feel that they're able to express things that work for them already, that might be really beneficial to just make sure that that transition can be as smooth as possible. So I hope I've been able to explain that. I'm not sure, Beth, if you want to add anything, or Deborah, Craig.
No, I think that's great. Craig, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think you've kind of covered everything I was thinking of there. Again, kind of referring back to what we were talking about before, visuals I feel are so important. And I love the idea that you were saying there about a photo book, something like that as well, to kind of really support that, something that the young person can take away with them, they can talk to, they can hopefully show it off and share it with others as well, would be lovely. to have. And again, as we said before as well, really validating how that young person is feeling as well. So listening to them, taking that on, considering how they're feeling about, and letting them know that that's okay to feel like that as well, and how we can together help to support it. The other bit I was thinking about was kind of the follow-up from it as well. Quite a lot of it can be the build-up to the transition, but then making sure that the part after that as well is also still considered as well, that it's not just leading up to that one day or that one transition that's happening, but making sure that that's then followed up as well, to make sure that that continuity is there, and really thinking about what works well now for them. So if it is moving from a nursery to a primary school, then why does it work just now? How are they feeling just now? What are those things that are really helping to make the difference for them just now, that can be replicated, that can be carried over, that's going to help that young person when they move on with that transition?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Craig and Sharon.
So again, this is a question for you, Beth, and it says, my child finds a classroom too noisy or bright or busy, and what can I expect their school to be able to do to help?
Yeah, definitely. I think we have spoken quite a lot today already about those sensory needs and the way that it can impact on learning. And as with any issue really that we've been speaking about today, it's about talking to the school and having that conversation. I think in the context, like we've kind of spoken about, sometimes it's getting into more depth about what that means and what that looks like for your child in particular. You know, if your teacher has lots of different autistic pupils, they'll all have different experiences and different things that they want support with. And it is about building that individualized plan that's going to meet their specific needs. So, you know, for some children, it's the noise of the classroom, and loads of things can help with that. We've mentioned a few different things, but even sometimes it can be as simple as where a child's sitting in the class. Like if they're right at the back of the class, is it a quieter space? If they're in the middle, surrounded by lots of other children making lots of noise, is that the best space for them to be in? Would they rather be to the side somewhere that's a bit quieter, still within, you know, the classroom space, but is that going to help them? Would they rather sit at the front so there's less to see in terms of sort of visual stimulation? They're not watching all their other pupils fidgeting or chatting or whatever. You know, outside of the classroom, is there space where they can go and decompress? Is there a quiet space they can have access to? There's so many different things that can help, and really it's that conversation and having that back and forth with the school, offering ideas that you have that maybe, you know, work really well at home for when your child's feeling overwhelmed. How could you replicate that, or what similar stuff might work in the classroom as well? And asking the school what they have available. If the school aren't sure what to do, what are the school going to do about it? Are they going to seek further advice? Are there extra resources the school could get hold of from the local authority? How are they going to do it? Because they've got that duty to meet your child's needs no matter what school they're attending. So how are they going to do that? Do they have resources available? If not, are they going to seek those out? Is there more training that the teachers need to do? But ultimately, it's about your child and how it works for them. We've mentioned a few different sort of planning ideas, but really, any kind of a written plan can be helpful for setting out specifically, and those kind of plans can get into the sort of minutiae of the day if they need to, if that's going to be helpful for making sure that everybody working with your child knows what's going to work well for them, or things to avoid that are going to cause difficulties for them. Deborah, Craig, I don't know if you've got anything to add there.
I was just going to say, sometimes the tolerance can change. So sometimes, you know, it might be that the young person is able to cope with, you know, a noisy classroom, you know, in the morning, but not in the afternoon. Or, and I think it's not. Sometimes I've heard things like, you know, like they're choosing to do that, or they're choosing for that to bother them. It didn't bother them yesterday, so it must be something else. And I think actually that's not accurate, you know, and we need to be aware of those tolerance levels, changing depending on stress levels, and where that young person is at any given moment on that day. So I think if you do have access to like an occupational therapist, and you can ask for that, you can do a referral, they can be helpful in creating a sensory profile, but there's many sensory profiles now that I know teachers have ready kind of access to, and if you can sit down with them and you can look at it and say, this is what I feel, you know, where they're you know, where their kind of needs are, and then create the profile with the team together based on that. Yeah, that's that just now.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, like you say, there's so many levels to these things. Like it might be that the first time, the first conversation at the classroom door at the end of the day might be all that you need. If that's not the case, it might be sitting down with the school and having that more formal meeting. If there's still things not working, maybe you do need to look into a sensory profile. Maybe the school has one. If they don't, then again, it's that next step of, okay, well, is there an occupational therapist? You as a parent have the right to refer and to ask for assessment. So if you need to ask the school for that or the local authority, you can. You know, there are those steps of getting that support in different ways to escalate it. And schools can help you to do that, and the local authority certainly has the duty to. And as well, that's where Enquire, we come in as well, so we can help you with some of that process, or talking to Scottish Autism as well, because they'll have that breadth of understanding about autism too, if you are wanting more advice about that more specifically. I'm just going to skip now to the end because I'm very conscious of the time, and we're very, very grateful for Deborah and Craig for joining us this evening. We really hope that you found the session helpful. And we'd love to hear what you think. If you can scan with your phone that QR code, it will take you to a longer form survey. We'll also email you that after the event. We're going to email you in the next week or so all the slides from today and some of the links that we've mentioned throughout today from our website. And we'll also send you a link to the survey as well. But we would really, really love to hear what you thought. You know, we want our outreach to be valuable, and we want these sessions to be helpful for parents and carers. So anything you have to say or to let us know about what worked really well or what didn't, what we could improve for next time, we would genuinely love to hear it. So give that a scan if you'd like. And on this next slide, I'm just going to put again all the information about Enquire and about Scottish Autism. So that's how you can get in touch with us, with our helpline, with the Scottish Autism helpline as well. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Deborah and Craig, thank you so much for joining us, and Sharon as well, and Jen, with all your sort of behind the scenes chat, keeping up and poll sharing. So yeah, thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.